My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold my phone. There, on Instagram's bright screen, was the proof I had dreaded finding. The profile, Ana Santos 2023, which had been sending disturbing messages to my boyfriend Pedro for weeks, had just posted using a photo I would recognize anywhere. It was my graduation portrait, the one that sat on the coffee table in my mother's living room. I felt my stomach turn and had to sit down to avoid falling. Just 3 months ago, Pedro and I were living the best moment of our relationship, planning to move in together, dreaming about our future. How could my own mother be behind all this sabotage? The memories of the past few months started fitting together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. I met Pedro on a Saturday afternoon during a photography workshop. He was photographing the event, and I was one of the participants. Our eyes met several times throughout the day until he finally gathered the courage to start a conversation during the coffee break. The connection was instant. We shared the same peculiar sense of humor and a passion for old horror movies. After 3 dates, we were officially dating. Pedro was different from all the other relationships I'd had. He made me feel safe, respected, and most importantly, free to be myself. The only dark cloud in our sunny sky was my mother's reaction when I introduced him to her. A photographer? But honey, you need someone with a more stable profession, she said, barely waiting for Pedro to leave. I ignored the comment, as I always did with her criticism. But that was just the beginning. With each visit, she found a new flaw in him. His way of dressing, his haircut, even his São Paulo accent became a target for veiled criticism. These interference started subtly. My mother would coincidentally call me during our dates, always with some emergency. Then, she started showing up unannounced when Pedro was at my house. I was just passing by and decided to see how you were doing, was her standard excuse. During one of these surprise visits, I noticed how her eyes fixed on his phone, which was on the table while he was in the bathroom. At the time, I didn't give it much importance. Today, I realized that was the moment when everything began. Things started getting really strange when Pedro received the first message. I know you were at the cafe on Augusta Street yesterday afternoon with that redhead. He showed me the message immediately, confused and worried. It was true that he had been there, but for a work meeting with a client. I felt a chill down my spine. How could someone be monitoring his movements? The messages kept coming, always from different profiles. Some insinuated secret meetings that never happened. Others warned about supposed problematic history from previous relationships. The Ana Santos 2023 profile was the most persistent, claiming to have proof of a double life that Pedro was supposedly leading. Meanwhile, my mother intensified her own subtle attacks. Honey, have you noticed how he's been distant lately? She would comment during our conversations. A friend of mine saw him alone at the mall the other day. I thought it was strange he hadn't told you about it. Each of her comments planted a small seed of doubt in my mind, even though I didn't want to admit it. Our relationship, previously so light and confident, started showing cracks. Pedro became increasingly tense when receiving the messages, and even though I trusted him, couldn't avoid that twinge of insecurity. We started arguing about small things. He felt constantly questioned, and I caught myself checking his phone when he wasn't looking, behavior that had never been mine. The peak came when the Ana Santos 2023 profile started sending photos. They were images of Pedro in different places around the city, at the cafe, leaving work, even at the gym, all taken from a distance, as if someone was following him. The person behind the profile clearly knew our routine, knew where to find him. That's when I started to realize this couldn't be a coincidence. Someone close was orchestrating all of this, someone who had access to our lives, someone who wanted to separate us at any cost. The revelation came from a seemingly insignificant detail. In one of the photos sent by the fake profile, I noticed a reflection in the cafe's window. It was so subtle that it was almost unnoticeable. But after enlarging the image, my heart nearly stopped. The reflection showed a bag I knew very well. the red Louis Vuitton I had given my mother as a Christmas present last year. Overcome with a mixture of disbelief and horror, I began investigating the profile more deeply. The posting dates perfectly, matched Wednesday afternoons, when my mother claimed to be playing tennis with friends at the club. The photo locations were always near the route she took between our house and her work. But the final confirmation came from that graduation photo. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop and started gathering all the evidence. I took screenshots of the messages, organized the dates, marked the times. Each new detail I discovered felt like a stab in the heart. The messages had my mother's same writing pattern, including her characteristic typing errors, like writing more when it should be but. Even the misplaced commas were identical. I spent the entire night awake, rereading each message with new eyes. Now everything made sense. Her innocent comments about Pedro's schedules, the coincidences of being in the same places, the insinuations about his fidelity. My own mother had created an elaborate web of lies to destroy my relationship. Next morning, with deep dark circles and a heavy heart, I sat in front of my bedroom mirror. The woman staring back at me seemed to have aged years during that night. How would I face my mother? How would I confront the person who should be my greatest protector, but who had revealed herself to be my worst saboteur? The answer came with frightening clarity. I needed to expose the whole truth, not just for me and Pedro, but to finally break this toxic cycle that my mother had created. I chose a Sunday to confront her. Sunday lunch had always been sacred to my mother, another form of control I belatedly realized. I arrived early, carrying in my bag all the printed evidence, organized in a red folder. "Sweetie, what a nice surprise! I was just preparing that lasagna you love," she said, flashing that smile that now seemed so fake to me. I felt my stomach turn. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, placing the folder on the kitchen table. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had always been good at keeping up appearances. "Of course, darling. Did something happen?" I opened the folder and started spreading the printouts across the table, one by one. I watched her face gradually pale as the photos, messages, and evidence accumulated. "Why, Mom? Why did you do this?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, but her voice trembled. It was the same voice she used when I was a child, and caught her in a lie. The red bag and the photo's reflection. Your bag. The messages with your characteristic grammar mistakes. The graduation photo that only you have access to. Please, don't lie to me anymore. It was like a dam breaking. Her face contorted in a mixture of anger and desperation. "I did it to protect." "You!" she exploded. This photographer isn't good enough for you. You deserve someone better. Someone like your father was..." "Like the father who abandoned us when I was 5? I cut in, feeling years of hurt overflow. "I just don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. You're too naive. You always have been. Can't you see he's going to hurt you?" The reality of that conversation hit me like a slap. How many times had she manipulated my life using protection? As an excuse? How many friendships, how many relationships had she sabotaged over the years? I left my mother's house that Sunday with a clarity I had never experienced before. In the car, I called Pedro and asked him to meet me at our favorite cafe. He needed to know everything. When I told him the whole story, I watched his eyes fill, first with shock, then understanding, and finally relief. Months of paranoia and distrust finally made sense. Pedro held my hands across the table, and for the first time in weeks, I felt we could breathe again. "What do you want to do now?" he asked, with that gentleness that made me fall in love with him. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I established clear boundaries with my mother for the first time in my life. I blocked her number for a while, restricted her social media access, and made it clear that we would need family therapy if we wanted to have any kind of relationship in the future. The first few months were difficult. She tried everything. called the entire family, showed up at my workplace, sent dramatic letters, but I kept my position firm. With the help of my own therapist, I began to recognize and dismantle the toxic patterns I had normalized for so long. Pedro and I moved in, together 3 months later. Our relationship grew stronger after the storm. The trust, which had been shaken by my mother's manipulations, was rebuilt on stronger foundations. Today, a year later, I maintain limited and supervised contact with my mother. She still doesn't fully accept my boundaries, but she's learned to respect them, or at least pretend to respect them. And I've learned that true love, whether maternal or romantic, should never come with conditions or manipulations. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is setting boundaries with those who claim to love us.